Good afternoon, I guess. So have you all been able to go to the last two sessions or no? Okay, so those are, yes, yeah, you have. So they're online. I would say that this session, there's certain prep similarities with this one and the cover letter preparation in the following sense. For the cover letter, as in large part with the interview preparation, you're not thinking about the chronology of all of your jobs or the chronology of your educational experience. You're thinking about how your range of qualifications, so coursework, studies, volunteering, internships, jobs, even non-human services jobs, how those can be leveraged to fit into the key job responsibilities for the opening that you've applied to, that then you've got an interview for. To get the interview, that's what you do in the cover letter, right? So you're not just simply parroting back the list of things you've done. You're doing this content analysis of both the job description and the key job responsibilities, the big, heavy hitting things that job's going to do, and you're writing a cover letter that's organized, the body paragraphs around those, like 2 or 3 paragraphs worth. So that's what that session covered. Similarly then, in the interview, you're talking through that. So it's not resume structured, it's cover letter and thus job responsibility structured. So how does your wonderful mix of all kinds of experience fit into that, into that job? And they obviously have seen it, because they wouldn't have brought you in otherwise. So you've made a nice cut. So, but the way you're prepping again is that you're building off the cover letter to kind of talk through that fit. Tell them more things that tease out the fit, and then also prepare for the pockets of lack of fit, where you don't have a lot of qualifications in a certain area that they're interested in, for example. So here's what we're going to do today. So we have this table. I'm a big table gal. And that table is part of just a way that you can structure your preparation. But what I want to walk through then is the table, and mainly the ideas in the table. And that's kind of the content homework before an interview. Then the process homework, so what you want to think about in terms of the process of an interview, preparing yourself kind of psychologically, existentially. And then some discussion of different question types and some strategies for most effectively managing and responding to different kinds of questions. Okay, types more than actual specific questions. And then a little bit on follow-up. And then we'll be done, you'll be ready to interview, which you probably are now too. Okay, so content homework, so thinking about the table. So what does this table say? The idea is, and again, you really arguably could do this well for a cover letter. You want to review the posting. So I'm diving into the tasks now listed on this. You want to review the posting for the job opening and identify those clearly highest priority qualifications, right? So not attention to detail, for example. That's always on there, right? Because we always want that. But that's like at the bottom. Even if they arrogantly put it at the top, they haven't organized things by heftiness. Figure that out and figure out the really clear, meaty ones. Think about the rating of importance, and then you're going to look at your resume and you're going to create notes kind of per, this kind of table or not. Do something completely different. If you're not a table person, just take some notes, whatever. That's kind of how I think. And you're going to prep both cover letter and then your interview according to that. So let's walk through this. So qualifications that I have. So that's where you can just list out the key job responsibilities. Like what are they? In order of most important to least important, or the lower end. And then B column, column A with qualifications. Column B is prove it. So looking at your resume. So at your paid experience, your volunteer experience, internship experience, other kinds of service or training opportunities. If there's some things you can pluck from the back end section, that's kind of those deep trainings or other kinds of experiences, maybe experiences overseas that may bear upon, working in a diverse, multicultural clientele or workforce, for example. And then your coursework, your studies. So list those out per each of the responsibilities. And then after you've done that you want to think through, so this is for the interview now, not for the cover letter, because your cover letter you're not going to highlight, yeah, I don't have any of that kind of stuff. No. But that's going to come up, chances are, in the interview, right? So then you go to column C, as I have it here, qualifications I don't have as much or at all, right? And you're noting only those that relate to the big ticket item responsibilities. So don't say, yeah, you don't know access database if they don't mention access, who cares, right? Or they don't need Russian, don't worry about not speaking Russian. But things that seem to be less strength, so note those. And then think about, so column D, what that notes is, how will you address this if given the job, right? You could then, in advance of that, of course, talk through how will you address questions about that. So what, if any, related or similar experiences, qualifications might you have in that area? Without stretching it, you want to note, yeah, I don't have experience in the area of employee supervision. I have some nominally similar experience in working with college volunteers or as a grad student, or that's supervisory, that's pretty decent. But you want to note if you have some similar, you can jot that down and prep mentally. But you do always want to clarify, yeah, I realize it's not what you're asking, it's different, but I think it informs it. And then have in mind, again, how you're going to address, if you got the job, that lack. And that has to do with talking through, in some cases, additional training, or if they need an LCSW or prefer one if they don't require it, then here are your plans for proceeding with that. You've had some of the requisite coursework already. You have plans for pursuing supervision, of your work with clients, independently as needed. So you can talk, you prepared some thoughts about talking about that. But certain, additional training classes, if you need like the substance abuse, what's that called again, SAC or something, counselor. So if there are additional trainings that perhaps they prefer, you can talk through in advance what your plan would be for achieving those credentials and that you are interested in that. If it's a matter of supervising folks and you haven't had that experience before, then talking through your philosophy for stepping into that kind of duty so that you as a person who's newer to supervision, you would take a very consultative approach where you would check in with employees closely who've been there longer than you to make sure that you are understanding their the experiences they have in their own work environment, consult with other supervisors as well to get a sense of the approach to supervision that is established in the organization. So that kind of thing. So what is your style in light of being a little lower power on certain areas? What would be your philosophy or style for approaching that and ways of kind of addressing that learning curve, right? So thinking through that in advance can be really helpful because they may well ask about it, they may not. They may feel like, oh, she'll figure it out. But if they don't, then it's good to have, it'll look impressive that you've thought through those different issues. Okay. And then, so looking at the bottom of the sheet, when you're done with this, you can review the visual balance of the table. So hopefully you have a lot more going on the left side, meaning you have a lot more going on with things, that the qualifications that you do have. I mean, if you've gotten a job interview, in spite of there not being that left side dominance, that's interesting. What does that mean? It might make it a little challenging to repair because there's something that's connected with them, but it may not be obvious to you what it is, unless it is just a particular depth in like this one job skill that turns out to be not just their top most important, but like night and day, the key thing that they need that they haven't found in anybody else to date, right? What else? Here do we say? And then if the table is right side heavy, so the deficit's the lacks, or the lower numbers are right side favoring, yeah, you have more of an uphill battle competitively. But again, if you've secured the interview, then clearly something is speaking to them, right? So take a breath and proceed. What else? So then other kinds of questions. So you'll talk through your qualifications. You want to really, the main prep that you do is thinking through how to persuasively talk about the fit, right? Both in terms of the nature of your qualifications and the depth of those, the intensity of those qualifications. And students do ask about, I have management experience, but it's working at a retail store or a restaurant or whatever, oh my gosh, absolutely mention that. Of course that's relevant. That's totally relevant, right? So really make sure, don't, things that were much more peripheral or a light hour, maybe less things to draw on, but anything that provided relevant experience given those job responsibilities, do think through and add those in, and be prepared to talk about how they advanced or deepened your level of qualification in that particular area. Remember, in terms of enthusiasm, and hopefully this is genuine enthusiasm if you apply to the job, although I realize that bills have to be paid. But talk about your enthusiasm for having the opportunity to continue working along that specific dimension of work, right? That you get a lot of satisfaction, and think that it's just really important work to be engaged in, volunteer training or program assessment, or working with clients and their families, doing such and such types of intervention. So remember, it is surprisingly common, I think, as folks are nervous and they think that by virtue of applying, maybe it's obvious, I've announced my interest. So you get that, right? We can move beyond that. No. You actually want to, you do very much want to continue to, not to the point of just silliness, but to express your enthusiasm. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to learn more about the organization and your needs for hiring this position, which is a line that I encouraged at the bottom of the cover letter. So to reiterate that you're thrilled to have the opportunity to learn more. And then in talking through your fit with those, from your little prep list, if there are particular, it may not be every single one of those responsibilities, but if there are particular ones that you are just really, it's what drew you to applying for the position, then absolutely talk about the fit and then your enthusiasm, that this is exactly what you want to be doing for the following reasons. So that's good. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Let's see. So gaps in time, that's come up in terms of resume. People had concerns about that. So a gap would be, so not school. School is something you're doing. Potentially, so it could be, unemployment where you weren't volunteering, you weren't going to school, so you were not in paid employment, but it wasn't those other things. But other things that you could definitely talk about are if you were engaged in dependent care of any dependents or volunteering. I don't consider that to be a gap either. It's certainly something that you can very comfortably talk about what you're doing at that point. You can say you were engaged in a potential career shift at that point, that admittedly the market was pretty tight where you were, and you were balancing dependent care with trying to find a really good fitting position for you. You were committed in that period to, full-time dependent care, homeschooling, working with an elder. So I think in a human services context, while is it true that some folks will look askance at that and think less of it? Yeah, we can't control that. It's a reality, but I think you should very comfortably be able to walk through those things. And I don't know what your individual situations are, but that's, embrace that. And in terms of unemployment, if actually any of you have had that, at this point in time, and really over the last many years, the economy and the labor market is such that it's pretty common for folks to have gaps, right? So I don't know that those questions are terribly common, especially in human services, but also where you're coming out of school, they just kind of, you've been in school, even if long before that there was a gap, you've been in school, so they don't even ask that kind of question. So I wouldn't sweat it too much. There will be questions, the whole, what's your biggest weakness? Which I think are just foolish. So in the class, when I teach 840, part of my goal is to not just, support prospective employees and current employees that you all will be, and, being able to feel fully competent as employees, but to train you guys as eventual managers and hirers who won't ask those kinds of foolish questions. Because what do they, if you were a vegetable, that hopefully that never happens. But really, your greatest weakness. Well, how is that guaranteed to map onto the job in any reliable way? And how can you compare that question to the answer given by another worker or another applicant? It's just worthless, and it causes a huge amount of stress. You're thinking, oh, I got to give something so I look authentic and thoughtful and not pompous, but if it's serious, I may look like a loser or really bad. And so the classic one is, well, I have a hard time saying no. Oh, no. I have a hard time with time management, which actually can freak people out. Like time management, or I have a hard time delegating. Think about if the previous person holding that position, like they're shifting the whole focus because that person was a workaholic and stressed everybody out and stressed all of their supervisees out or whatever. You want to be careful how what you say there may trigger past employee experiences. So I'm not gonna weigh in on. Oh, sorry, yeah.
So is there a good
one? Right. So I was just gonna say I'm not gonna tell you what a good one is or what a good answer that is. Yeah, I don't know if I found that because I think the question is so flawed fundamentally that I'm not sure there is actually a legitimate answer. What I would say is, yeah, the whole time management thing, because that tends to be characteristic disproportionately of human services workers, disproportionately within that women, that it's either really cliche as an answer or it can be scary to the person you're interviewing with, like, oh, we don't need one of those again, right? We can brainstorm briefly what you might be inclined to say. But what you want to do, though, is you may allude to a weakness, give an example, talk about how you dealt with it, and your plan for how you manage it going forward. So regardless of what you say, it's got to be in that structure, right? So quick summary of it, specific example, how you addressed that example, because it was presumably a weakness causing an issue, and then how you seek to avoid that problem. So in general, any question around, what have been some challenges? Have you really engaged in have you had any errors in approaching working with such and such in the past? And what did you do about it? So you do want to be sure that have you made mistakes? Like that kind of questioning in general, like weaknesses, mistakes questions. You want to note it succinctly, talk through the example, and then talk about the solution and avoidance for the future. Like what are the insights you've gained from that such that you're a little more sharp going forward about avoiding that, right? That is the key structure, yeah.
So one of the things that I've done in job interviews is they generally ask your strength first, and then they give you the punch with what is your weakness.
Yeah.
And I've, in the past, talked about my strength and then used some of my strengths also as a weakness.
Like too much of the strength being the weakness?
Yeah.
Which is, hopefully when that happens, the interviewer has the insight, oh, that was kind of a stupid question, wasn't it? Okay. Because they're like, oh, yeah, that really doesn't help with anything. That's standard. It's not a disaster. With the strength, though, so here's another strategy. With the strength, I would map it onto the job responsibilities, right? Not just some random, I have lots of enthusiasm. I delegate well. See about a strength or set of strengths that relate to, I have particularly strong insights in terms of talking to employees and working with them in terms of their needs for support in providing supervision or volunteer management with folks who aren't getting paid, really cueing on the supports and motivation that they need to do their job well and stay with us. Something like, I keep honing in on more macro level skills, sorry. So something that maps, right, would be good. And then the weakness, ideally, shouldn't be key to the responsibilities, right? Well, I don't know how to supervise employees or conduct performance reviews if my life depended on it, which you wouldn't say regardless, but ideally the weakness is not, totally central to one of the responsibilities. Okay. Yeah.
Can I go back real quick just to gaps in employment? And so if between undergraduate and graduate school there's like a year gap, and you did a little bit of volunteering here and there, but nothing to make up for 40 hours a week or even 30 hours a week, can you say something? How would you address that as far as like career exploration? Like,
Yeah, I mean, again,
Time to
a
go.
year at this point, honestly, I don't even, it's barely a gap,
Okay.
right? That's kind of a couple breaths, you know? You know, you could say a combination of you are, you know, focused on dependent care while exploring future career opportunities, which is, I'm guessing, probably what was happening, right, on some level.
Yeah.
So that, I think just a quick answer that's specific enough so it's not obtuse and, you know, invites more questioning, it's not mysterious, but is not too long. And that's also a lot of kind of the art, not science, like strategy here, is you want to have answers that are specific and not too long. Like think about, in some cases, that one was like a sentence or two. With more detailed answers about your qualifications, you want to have an arc that's like a paragraph or so, like 5 or 6 sentences max, right? So you want to have the lead sentence. I don't know if you guys ever went through, like I went through, like in 5th grade, it was intensive writing, you know, learning about how to write, and so we learned to structure a paragraph. So the lead sentence is kind of a summary, you break down the examples of it, and then you kind of wrap it up, right? So you want to have a sense of an arc. It's one of the great fears, you know, these folks that are interviewing, they are interviewing inevitably too many people. It's exhausting, it's on top of all their other work. They need to be able to then take the data, you know, note it down and somehow compare across people, which is actually stunningly hard to do. Like it's as much as it's hard to interview, like be on that side, being the interviewer and recalling the interviewee's answers to questions is really pretty challenging. But you want to have the sense that the answer is going to terminate. It's going to give you what you need and then wrap up. So it's that startup, the lead sentence, summary, details, and then concluding. If you get off into an answer that's too long or ill-formed, and you give the person the sense that it's like this, going and going and going, especially if you've gotten off the wrong track and it's going and it's just not even what the person wanted, it just creates this panic and this sense of this person is not someone I can work with, like, oh God, I'm being pulled into this wild goose chase, right? So it's better, another way, kind of metaphor or image for thinking about this is how you wear perfume or cologne. You want to wear just enough that the person might be interested in coming closer to smell it, then be so much that it's like, oh goodness, and you run away. It's a similar, it's a balance. If it's too short, it sounds like you're being evasive or a little too, you know, cute, right? But if you go on too long, it just, especially again if you are a little bit off base, then it can feel almost panicky on the part of the interviewer or annoying, of course, yeah. Okay. Now how are we doing? So the weaknesses I punted. Any ideas of weaknesses that you guys would share? We can at least process those.
I often share that I'm not good at multitasking.
Okay.
This is a common belief in our culture that
We can when actually we
needs,
can't. Yeah.
Everybody needs to be multitasking and really
Yeah.
good at it. And you even see it in job descriptions,
Mhm.
able to multitask.
Yes.
But I then talk about how, and my other weakness is that I don't necessarily learn things quickly. So that's another
Okay.
thing that people often say is a strength. Is, yeah, I learn things really quickly.
Right.
But that it's really important to me to do a really good job, and that when I learn something, I learn it really well, and then I apply myself to do a really good job. And so that's, to me, that's like the flip coin, the other side of the coin of those two weaknesses.
Mhm.
And so I don't really see it as a weakness, I just see it as,
A style.
yeah.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts on those two different things. So with the multitasking, so do you have an example that you give of that, or else the potential negative effects that can have sometimes and how you manage those?
I don't have a for sure example, but just,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just curious, like how you tease it out.
I mean, just in general, I don't know.
So what I might do is come up with an example of how you, and that can be frustrating sometimes for folks that I work with, you know, on a team or employees who come to me and kind of need me to juggle multiple things at once, and it has the possible bad side effect that they can feel like I'm asking them to wait when they really want me to be able to cue in on something right on the spot. But I find that I tend to then not be able to give good attention or accurate attention to that if they come in while I'm doing something else. So I try to compensate for that by, you know, having scheduled times of availability. I make sure I schedule, you know, prepared meetings with them on a weekly or regular basis. And I do feel then that it evens out because the employees experience me as being incredibly attuned to what their issue is, when they come to me. So they may have to wait a little bit, but I'm clear up front about that, when we're going to schedule time to talk about it, and then I really focus then singularly on that issue, and it seems to work in the long run. So that might be how I would, and then just noting that. So what that means is that you have to be attuned to how many things you're juggling at a given time and have a plan for addressing those sequentially and prioritizing the time-sensitive ones, the really important ones, versus the ones that are less important, so that you can manage that kind of multitasking challenge issue. So I might tease out briefly some of those things. With it takes you a long time to learn. I might not give that as a weakness, because that offhand, without knowing you, might come off as a little alarming. But flip it as like, what is your approach to whatever, like depending on how it comes up, is note that you tend to be really about areas that you don't know, rather than diving in quickly and just trying stuff out and thinking you have an insight based upon a little bit of information. You really like to be pretty deliberative about it and consultative. So you like to talk to a range of different stakeholders about certain important issues. Check your understanding, whether it's with clients, with subordinates, with other managers, to get a sense of your familiarity with the issue. For example, when you were a blah, this is the approach that you took. So I would give that more as a personal style type of example than a weakness, and it's only because I think, unfortunately, it can be misconstrued if you give it as a weakness, and I think actually it could be a strength. So, how are we doing? Other questions? Okay. Let's see here. Then you want to come up with some questions, right? Because they may ask those. So, tell me more about the direction you see this job is heading if it doesn't come up. Right? What are you really hoping to achieve with this position in the short term or the near term? Like, are there particular visions that you have for it? They may or may not have an answer to that, really. What's a typical day like for this position, if there is one? How does this position interact with other ones that work alongside it? What have been some challenges and successes of the folks in this position previously? So those are all pretty savvy questions, right, that really can make them feel like you are both genuinely interested and fairly insightful about the natural startup challenges that position and its holder would have. Okay, so prep some of those. Okay, now let's move to the process if we're ready. So we're going off the table now. So, all of us have different reactions to context and kind of nerves and, dealing with things like this. I tend to be fairly sensitive to it, so that's why I bring it up and talking through this. So understanding where the interview is going to be, like the building, like making sure that we have a sense. Inevitably, there are times, and MapQuest often does this to me, where the directions are wrong, or I have assumed a certain location in my head, and I kind of go there and I make the directions fit, and then I realize, oh, no. Or the famous time, I don't know, I was like 8.5 months pregnant. And I had an interview. It was actually an interview, but it was an appointment to collect data at an organization for my dissertation. And I literally started driving north in the state, and the place was south. So I had to call up and reschedule. I mean, it was just, who knows what I was not thinking. So just, again, sounds silly, but just being sure, and even if it helps you to relax, driving by, if it's in town, driving by the place in advance, getting kind of sure you know where the room is, what's the parking thing going to be like, or you can take a bus, just kind of knowing the setup. If that kind of thing doesn't throw you, whatever. Who it's going to be with, so it's fine to ask, so who can I look forward to meeting with, like how many people? So in public interviews especially, typically it can be a panel of folks. The other dynamics there is it's tricky, it can feel really overwhelming, but it's all for a good reason. Those folks, often it'll be a panel, you'll be sitting in front of it, and they are stone-faced. And that is designed purposely to equalize the experience and opportunity that the interviews provide across candidates. Public sector employment has been a boon of opportunity for folks who are, socioeconomically shut out of the labor force historically. And things like that, as kind of silly or cumbersome as they strike us often, are actually there for a good reason. So, but it can feel like not knowing that in advance, it can feel really alarming. Or there are other interviews that I've been in as well as done with people called a fishbowl, where you have folks sitting in a circle in the middle and then you have interviewers on the outside. It might be that one person's asking questions only, or they may rotate question asking, and then it's a group thing where you're sharing, you've got to navigate together the answers, and that's why, because they want to see how you interact as a person in a group, which is kind of cool and also incredibly alarming, right? But so asking that in advance, like, is it just me? Is it multiple candidates? How many folks will be there? Happen to know what their titles are, because also there's going to be like an HR person and then your prospective boss, will it be prospective colleagues? So, you know, obviously if they're, I don't know, or if they get somehow testy or disinterested in answering that, then, you know, just ask a bit and then drop it if you're not getting much, and just then kind of be prepared for it could be a lot of things. But potentially you may get the information that can be helpful, right? Yeah.
How do you, I'm just trying to envision how you ask that question, because there's times that the HR person is just setting up the interview and completely, and they have no idea that answer. And also there's times where no HR, you're not getting a phone call, you're getting invited by email. Would you send an email back?
Yeah, or if there's they may give you a link to someone you can call for information. So you can try that out. So try it. Don't panic if you can't figure it out, but it's worth a little try. Yeah, no, it can be. And when you get there, I mean, it's a little late in terms of emotional prep, but you could ask too, if you don't know at that point, you know, who else is going to be there. Yeah. Getting a sense of how folks dress there, although that can be risky because your familiarity with how they dress may be based on a different context, and it may be that for interviews, they up it several notches. So if you're trying to match what you've seen in a non-interview context, you may be underdressed. So I, in general, especially for younger females, and females, period, but especially younger females, I vote for definitely more formal than you would day-to-day work even. And that, and we're not talking about taffeta, but a suit or separates would not be too much. And kind of on the conservative side, like not, I mean, again, this is getting into all kinds of crazy, you know, gender stereotyping things, but not, like stuff that's, you know, in good shape, stylish, but not vampish, not, you know, practical. So what does that mean? Like maybe not stilettos, not kitten heels. I mean, I feel gross. This is the point in this where I always get a little gross feeling, because it's, again, it's impinging upon creative and personal freedom, and yet the reality being where they don't know you at all. Like you want to be able to have a competent but relatively neutral impression, so that they can, so what speaks for them is what you're saying versus the visual, right? And so kind of in that sense, attention to detail comes into the visual as much. Getting your hair off your face, right, is good. And if you tend to play with it, like just putting it in a way that it's not going to get in your way. You know, being comfortable, so you don't have to like be pulling at stuff a lot, that it just, you feel comfortable, but it's reliably, it looks like you're having respect for that process. Whatever that's going to be. Does that sound good? Right? Okay. And for women, it's harder, right? Men have much more limited options in terms of what they're going to put on. And women, there can be all kinds of ways to do this, right? So that it requires more thinking, I suppose. Okay. Yeah, so make sure your professor, your former supervisor, and your mother would all approve, or other family member if need be, right? Okay. Let's see here. Oh, what materials do you need to bring with you? It would be good to bring your resume and cover letter, just as a backup. So you can give them to them if they don't have them handy, which you think they would, but they may not. The job posting couldn't hurt, right? Blank notepad to take notes. That's just fine. I wouldn't become, in the interview, I wouldn't become obsessed with writing a ton of information, because that'll interrupt your eye contact when you really want to be personally engaged. And if you get to the point of negotiation, and we'll talk about that next time, I think you have to take notes, because it's impossible to keep that stuff, you know, keep it in track. But keep that down, and you can jot notes, but this is more important. How you get there, we discussed that. Thinking about a smooth opener Like if you don't excel at small talk or like it, just literally envisioning, like don't practice a joke because then it seems really canned, but envision like how, unless the person just is able to bring you into it verbally, like if they're not doing that for you, how will you verbally start this? Like how will you greet them? Do you have like could be just a little toss-off thing you might say, whether it's, about the weather or what a great building, or just something so that you're not caught, hi, just, and some of us are great at that, but others need to think, like, well, how am I going to get this going, right? Because it is about, like, what academics joke about with academic job searches, and those are intense. It's a 2-day interview. You fly in the night before, 8 a.m. all the way to 6 p.m. the second day in half-hour increments, but for the job, the research presentation, which is like an hour and a half, like you are on the entire time. And we joke that what we're kind of assessing, yes, there's all the actual research and teaching skills, is do we want to have coffee with you? Because potentially, with tenure, which we hope to keep, it's a lifetime gig. And so are you, for us, for our students, for our community partners, for the rest of the university, are you someone who we would enjoy having coffee with? It's actually not, it's silly, but it's not a bad standard. So it's similar. They want to get a sense of your personability and your engageability. And so things like a silly little starting, like can you start a conversation in a smooth way? And don't freak out if it doesn't go, like you stutter a bit, or it's fine. You'll recover. But thinking about it is okay. Okay, let's see about time. We're good. Okay, so any other thoughts on this?
So I'm just wondering if you think that it's necessary to ask, like, a lot of times when I go in, I'll be like, yeah, I brought some writing materials. Do you mind if I take a few notes during the interview?
No.
Or is it just a given nowadays that people are taking notes? Because I feel like I don't want to disrespect them by writing a few things down here and there.
Yeah,
but is it necessary to ask?
What you could do, I don't think you don't have to,
Okay.
but let's say I wouldn't formally ask up front. I would say at the point where you feel like you want to jot some notes down, then you could say quickly, is it okay if I take down a few notes on this? Like, I think if you do it as a summary thing at the front, then it seems a little bit like, okay, may I take notes now, versus as needed, just checking in, and it shows that kind of check-in, sensibility.
And then the other thing is, I usually prepare 5 different questions because I've noticed that they always seem to cover 2 of them.
Okay.
And I've been in the middle of interviews, and they say, do you have any questions? And it's like, I'm stumped because you've answered all my questions. And so I also write them down.
Absolutely. I think writing down is great because you won't remember them. Chances are you'll forget them. Yeah, and 5, if you can't come up with 5, don't sweat it. But I would say, yes, inevitably, some of them will be answered through the course of the interview. So we'll have 2 extra. 3 even would be good. So, yeah, it's great. There's the handshake, right? So why don't you guys shake each other's hands? Let's take 1 minute, stand up, turn around, shake hands. So you want to come in so that you're not like budging into the person, but you want to make contact with the web, right? That's the full. And then so this is not good, and so this is the good positioning. And then it's the issue of the amount of grip, right? So if you are too firm, it'll be painful. If it's someone who's older who has arthritis, then literally, regardless of where you squeeze, it's going to hurt or it will be annoying, right? So if you do it, too close up and it's too hard, that's actually quite painful as well. So, but you want, like you mean it, you do want to have a good enough grip that there is something there, and a little kind of firm elbow and then a shake, right? But not the kind of wet fish where you're slipping off here, where there's just you're not in far enough and it's loose. Oh, right? So a good firm that kind of exudes, whether it should or not, a sense of confidence and competence and all that good stuff, all right?
Well, isn't the point of a handshake like reaching out to meet somebody? It's about like connecting with somebody.
It's connecting, right? And so literally, honestly, it's the web touch is that connection. If you fall short of that, again, don't freak out if you don't pull it off. But if you're like way out here, that sense of connection is not met. Like it needs to be at the web and then a gentle, firm connection there. Okay, but women they tend to disproportionately grab up in here, and both it can actually really hurt someone who's got the arthritis up in this area, and then it doesn't feel connected. It feels kind of shy and tentative. So, yes.
So something I've noticed over the last few months is that people seem to be going away from the handshake.
Are they germ-phobic or?
They're doing this now. And I
Oh, no,
this is what they're doing.
I mean, Michelle, I
And
could pull it
I
off.
was like, kind of caught off guard because I go like this and it's like this and these are adults, these are professionals, and I'm going.
Maybe it's a germ, concern thing where you're not.
I was just wondering if you knew.
No,
about that.
I mean, so then again, it's like use your clinical skills where you're matching, you're starting where the client is, so to speak. So if that comes at you, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was gonna say, I actually have a condition where my hands and feet like sweat a lot.
Okay, yeah.
So like that's kind of like something that.
Yeah. So it's a way of avoiding that problem. Yeah. So absolutely that. So if you meet that, if that's what you get. I'm not sure that it's established enough that for you to generate it, I might kind of hold off then and wait, and then just do a quick, wipe, beforehand. It sounds like you have a strategy for addressing it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. And then pairing that again with your intro, small talk. Right. That's good. So okay. All right. So now let's talk about question types. Right. So the ones I want to talk through are open-ended, closed-ended, and probes, okay? And in teaching 840, I talk to students about how to handle these and use these as interviewers, as well as interviewees. Here it's obviously just for interviewees. But let's think about open-ended questions, right? So let's think of an example of one. So tell me about your top 3 qualifications for this position. Or no, I'm sorry. Tell me about your strongest qualification for this position. Okay. That is tricky, and whether they mean it to be or not, it's kind of a setup, because that assumes that you really understand both what the top responsibility is in their posting, that you know for sure which one it is, and that you understand their take on that further. And maybe, community needs assessments. Well, who knows what kind of angle they have on that? That's a huge, broad topic. Or, working with families and kids. Who knows what their philosophy is to that, right? So, but even aside from not knowing the specific sensibility of it, it's a very big area. So there are a couple thoughts I have on those, the open-ended questions. So one is to fork it, which means you want to, this does require thinking on your feet. You can try to anticipate some of these and prep the fork. If you can't anticipate, then you're going to have to do it, on the fly. But what fork means is, wow, that's a great question. That makes me think of my qualifications in A, B, and C, or A and B. You can have 2, right? That's fork, or 3 times, right? Fork. Because you're not sure, wow, that's a really big category, working with families and kids, right? Community needs assessments, whatever. And if you feel like again, it's a broad topic, lots of your stuff fits into it, it's going to make for a really long answer that you're not sure is going to be on target, right? Then you fork it to narrow and you say, oh, that's a great question, makes me think of A and B, or A, B, and C. Would it be helpful for me to start with one versus the other to talk about? So you actually give them the opportunity to weigh in. Oh, why don't you talk about such and such, right? Or they may just say, oh, whatever, you decide. That's fine too, which means that they don't really care and either one is of interest, but it gives you then the chance to save yourself from going off on some wild goose chase down this line where what you're talking about is not of interest, not relevant, right? And then the critical other key, which is, again, the key for any answer that you give, but especially with the open-ended, where we tend to just, because we're so nervous, like, oh gosh, am I getting at what they wanted? We have this instinct to just keep talking, and maybe we'll hit it at some point in all of our words, right? So not doing that. So keeping with that arc, right? That perfume metaphor, right? So oh, why don't you start with such and such? So the such and such, you say, well, so I have, as I indicated, I have this, depth of experience in such and such. Then you give some examples. When I was, in the position of blah, I got to do this and this and this, and they allowed me to do blah, blah, blah. When I was blah, another position, I got to do this, blah, blah, blah. And also, as an MSW student, as a graduate student, I was fortunate to take a class where I, learned about da-da-da, and I was able to independently conduct an assessment or, do a project that allowed me to blah, blah, blah. Can I, I'm happy to elaborate, or want me to talk about this other area that I see as relevant to this skill, right? So chopping it down. So it's showing, one, that you're great at self-awareness and self-management just generally as a person, so good for coffee, right? That you're not going to go on and on and on. That you're analytical, that you're able to kind of diagnose a big topic and break it down manageably. And then it just does a much better job of assuring relevance of your answer. Does that make sense, that forking thing? Okay. And again, I'm happy to offer further detail if that would be helpful. So again, art, not science. You don't want the answer to be so abrupt that it seems mysterious or just kind of awkward, right? But you don't want it to go on and on and on. So really, you can prep that even if you don't know for sure what the answers are going to be. Like, you could, with the column A, column B prep, you could prep the really major seeming job responsibilities, and then go ahead and prep all the others. If they've got this long list they provide, then go ahead and prep those too. And then if some of those job responsibilities seem like a really broad category, like setting you up for this broad open-ended question, then create the fork, and then sub-prep each of those areas in terms of responsibilities, qualifications that you have in each of those sub-areas that you create. So that'll allow you to go right into that specificity nicely. Right. Closed-ended questions. So if you're asked, especially if you're asked a closed question that doesn't favor your qualifications. So let's see, they prefer 3 years of supervisory experience. So, do you have 3 years of supervisory experience? And let's say you only have 1 at most. What do I have? Here's an example. I have just 1 year of supervisory experience. But in 2 positions I've held in the past as X and Y, I had the opportunity to develop human resource management skills by collaborating with my supervisor to plan right? So it is very important not to be hedgy or padding or misrepresenting your experience. You want to answer that as is. And then within reason, again, not padding, not stretching too much, but if you think you have some supplementary or complementary experience that you can illuminate, that closed question on, then briefly note it, right? And there I wouldn't ask if would you like me to elaborate? I would just kind of give the brief elaboration because they may cut you off and make no. Yeah.
What happens if you have some skills, but you did not list that business as part of your resume?
So it should be in your resume. You shouldn't have done that.
But there might be reasons why you don't want to list it on your resume, like as
but then why would you
conflict with the owner.
But then I'm confused why, if you don't want to list it on your resume, why you'd want to bring it up in the interview.
Because if you had 3 years of supervisory experience at that place, but you really don't want them to contact the employer.
Okay. So that goes to the practice of talking to references. And ideally, hiring folks should not cold call folks who are not listed as references if they're concerned about a given job not having an associated reference given. Give the employee the opportunity you ask them why in the interview, and you give them the chance to respond to that. That's just kind of shenanigans otherwise. And it is complicated. I mean, it could be something bad where the employee did something that's not appropriate, but chances are it's way more complicated than that, 2-sided street, and you listen to the employee's response, and then you make a decision about whether that seems like a good response. So I think it's tricky to not do the resume and then do it in the interview. I think it's better. It's still a risk. I can't, you got to be comfortable with it, but I'd probably still list it on the resume and then hope they don't call, and then if need be, discuss it if it comes up in the interview, right? Because 3 years especially, that would seem, it would announce itself as a major issue that suddenly commands attention, that they discover, whoa, you had 3 years, what? I don't think you want that. But yeah, is it a risk if they decide to track the person down? Yeah, that's kind of, who does that really, right? So, but ultimately, like with all these sessions, all of this kind of stuff, it's your experience, your material, and you have to be okay with that decision. Right? There's no one way to do things. How's that answer? You're looking very contemplative right now. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of taking the ex-owner out to eat, maybe to a nice restaurant.
Oh, okay. Someone gets a good meal out of this deal, out of this conversation. That's excellent. Okay. Okay, so close. And again, if it's closed and not just about kind of not in favor of your experiences, but it makes you think of this other thing, like, oh, that's close to this other thing that I think is relevant to this job that'd be interesting to talk about. You don't want to dive off into that, but you can answer the question, and then you can note quickly. Yeah, that also is somewhat. It makes me think of it a little bit like a fork. You're adding a tine, right? Like a tine being a piece of the fork, right? Or you could say that actually makes me think of this other area of my experience in such and such. I'd be happy to talk about that at some point if that seems helpful. But then drop it, and so they can take you up on it. And if they don't feel all embarrassed or awkward. It's that, for one thing, I mean, the interviewer, if they're good, they have to have comparable data across all the interviewees. And so if that is bringing you way off, and they somehow feel like, oh, I don't know what to do with that information, or I'm limited on time, this person's clearly great, then there's a reason they'll move you on. So don't sweat about it. But just, I think, being helpful, but then you offer a suggestion and then stop rather than diving forward. That's good. And then there are probes, right? So you rely on these to clarify questions you're not sure you understand, but in a humble way. So I stress this moderately for interviewers where my angle on interviewing is not to do the gotcha, not to stress people out, put them on edge, test them out, but rather to support them in doing their best, right? So being encouraging, using nice, nonverbal cues, the eye contact, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more about that? So on the employer side, I stress that. I'm not into the gotcha. In terms of you all as employees, interviewing or prospective employees, you may not be clear about questions, right? So rather than diving in kind of cold or not seeing, not sure, you want to ask for clarification, so a probe to the question that was posed to you. So I can imagine that's a really central issue, a really important consideration in this position. Would you mind giving me a little more information about, about what you mean by blah, blah? Because I want to be sure to focus my answer appropriately, right? So if you're really not clear, don't dive off. If you've managed to dive off without checking, give something, and in general, whenever you give an answer, you do want to have again, that lead sentence, a concrete set of details, and then if you dove off without the probe. But I'm not certain that was answering your question. Can you, if not, can you give me a little more detail? Again, better do that at the beginning of the answer than the end. But whenever you answer, you want to have that summary, some concrete information or details, and then wrap it up, right? So that each answer, even if it's a little off, it's a quality answer that's media they can map onto. Okay. What else? Specifics. Show them, don't tell them. So give details about your experiences, amounts, kinds, types of clients, types of programs, durations of facilitated groups, how long each session was, what your role was in it. Again, I'm saying this, but you're not allowed to then go on beyond the paragraph. But as you structure the tight, succinct, paragraph-shaped answer, keep in mind that it's those details that are really important, right? Rather than getting gloopy and kind of summing things up. Because they've got the sum up from your resume. So here they want to have the mapping experience, how you map onto the job, and then some concrete details thereof. Okay? Yeah.
If you're doing the interview over the phone or on Skype,
Yeah.
is there anything you would recommend to do differently or ways to compensate?
Well, you get to wear your pajamas on the bottom, so that's awesome. And your fuzzy house shoes. So there's the whole glubby, with Skype especially, right? The delay factor. So that's unnerving. So I would try, as awkward as it might feel, to talk a little slower and have more gaps, and try to defer, wait a bit longer than you normally would and try to defer to the other speaker or speakers, right? So that you're not constantly cutting them off. What else? the visuals that you get on Skype may be funky, like not accurate, because people may forget that they're visual, that that they're seeable or being seen. So they may be more quizzical looking or have less socially appropriate facial expressions because they're, even though we can see each other, we're kind of forgetting that they can see us, kind of thing. Does that answer your question? Or phone is tricky because you don't get any of the visual stuff, right? So, like with reading an email and trying to glean the tone, you just need to take a breath and try to retain confidence in spite of thinking maybe in a moment that things aren't going well, or that they're being negative or cold or abrupt. It could be that there's all kinds of like in the background to an answer, even though the verbiage or the tone seems abrupt, right? So just more, it's about kind of giving yourself the interpersonal or the intrapersonal pep talk as you go. So with your fuzzy house shoes on, in your case. How's that? Yeah, I know we're almost out of time. Final point. So following up, I think a quick thank you note is really nice. Years ago, I would say email was premature, like not it should be written. Now written is like goosey, like whoa, like they're kind of overeager. So an email, if it's a couple or maybe, I'd say if it's two different people, individual emails to them. If it's more than that, a group email is fine because they might compare each other's and whatever. And it's important with that, with a good thank you note is a general thank you, a sentence that's got a specific reference to something that was talked about, and then I hope we have the opportunity to talk further in the future. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me about the position. Yeah.
So I agree. I think the follow-up email is very important. However, I feel it's sometimes really hard because when you go into an interview and there's 4 or 5 people sitting at the table, you get their first name, but you don't have the 5 people's last name and how to figure out who they are, what their email is.
So that being if that's how it's set up, where you weren't really given the names formally, then I think it's okay to email the lead person and say, please convey my appreciation to the other people who were there. And they may well not do that, but that's fine. It's more that if you were kind of formally introduced or one of them took you around for a tour, then you should be sure you have their name so you can get the email address. Like if there was a personal contact with any of them beyond the interview, then that's different. Is it a disaster if you don't send an email? No, because plenty of people don't. But it's a nice touch. Again, it's that attention to details. And then chill out and wait, because in this job market, but in general with nonprofits who don't have extra money or time for any of their hiring processes, things take ridiculously long. It isn't ridiculous, it's just a reality. I mean, they may really honestly think it's going to be a 2-week process, and it's 2 months or even longer. So there's no accounting for that. I would say no sooner than a month, maybe about a month in, you could send a very quick note just checking in on the status of your application. And that's it. And then providing how you're reachable. But beyond that, no. Just to make it feel any better, articles that we have to write, research articles that are the core part of our job in the teaching, that take, sometimes years to write, certainly months. The norm is you may not contact the journal that you send it to for publication until 3 months in. You are not. If it's before the 3-month mark, you are considered a pest, and may actually interfere with the chances of acceptance. So it's pretty important. Like people often with the cover letter, they'll say at the end, like, I hope to hear from you soon. I'll call you back in 2 weeks to check in. No, you won't. No. Thank them for their time and effort spent reviewing materials. You'd be delighted to hear from them when they have a chance, right? At most, right? Okay. All right.
Can I ask one?
You can, yes.
So one question, an open-ended question that I really don't like to answer is, why should we hire you over someone else?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know the other people.
That's so hard, 'cause it's so gendery. Women have such a hard time touting themselves in general, I think. But in a human services context, it's true, team building, teamwork being what it is, that to promote yourself above others, especially unknown others, can also, kick back in your face. So at some point, a student doing a role play had a nice take on that. It was just, obviously, I bet you have a really outstanding team here, and I don't know them yet. I look forward to the opportunity to. What I can say is, I think I bring a couple of particular strengths for what seems like what you're looking for in this position after our conversation, X, Y, and B. And I am I would be thrilled to jump off into this position, as my next step after school. I think it's a great fit with my long-term interests, but I think I also have really good skills to bring to it. So I wouldn't actually get too nitty-gritty. I mean, you can touch on some specifics that then riff off of greater detail you gave earlier, just kind of a reminder rather than more deep detail. Because otherwise, I think then it can get a little haughty, like I'm all that, right? And it's true. Realistically, while I think women should be way better at touting themselves, there is that then kind of human services cultural thing about modesty as an employee, and we got to push back on that in general. But the interview is not the time to do that, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys very much. Good luck.
Yeah.